Okay, so this is week one, wellness. This is on change, how to facilitate positive change. Um, these are the lecture questions. If you're just listening to this or you're unable to attend the lecture, I would print these off and try to answer these and pass them in with the answers if you get them done. So pass in the answers to me once you get them done. Okay, so this is about change this week. As occupational therapists, we are agents of change. That's what we do. We help people change their behaviors to facilitate health or to facilitate occupational engagement so they can do the activities that are important to them. So it's just a big part of what you're doing as an occupational therapy, no matter what the setting, whether it's children, older adults, regular adults, whatever it is. We're trying to help people better their lives, better their health, through change, usually taking on adaptive devices, exercise programs, occupational activities, whatever it is, we're trying to get them to change and make their life better. In order to do that, in order to be effective in helping our patients change and become healthier, you need to understand why some people kind of struggle with that. Sometimes it seems change is easy with some people, some of our clients. Other times it seems like you're running into a brick wall, just kind of banging your head against the wall. Why is that? This week and next week we'll really get into those two questions in depth. We need to know when and how positive change is possible. Sometimes it isn't possible. Sometimes people just are not ready to change yet, and sometimes it is. So it's kind of, there's a way, we'll look at it today, how to really see where somebody's at, how to kind of move them along that pathway towards the positive change. And once we kind of assess where they're at and see if it's possible or not, what are proven tools? What are things we can use to help that person change? These are tools that you're going to use on yourself as well, actually, for that therapeutic self-assessment, to change things in your life, things you may have already tried successfully or unsuccessfully, around dieting or exercising or whatever it is you may want to change, positive change in your life. A really good example of that is this case that we're going to discuss. We'll discuss the problems around this case, and then we'll apply it to the stuff that we're going to learn and see how it's very useful, very practical. This case is probably in his 20s, early 30s. This guy, we're going to call him Joe. That's not his real name, but we'll call him Joe. And he was actually seen by two different students in our program, Hudson program, during their level 2 fieldwork experiences. These level 2s are something you're going to be doing not this summer, but the next summer. So it's really kind of coming up for you. And the students saw him in different settings. One student saw him in home health, and then the other student saw him later on in the hospital. And it's very interesting to see the different results and kind of different status that he's at in those two different settings. So the first student that saw Joe in his home, she wrote a story about this, and he sounded so familiar to so many patients that I've seen, and it's going to be a lot of patients that you're going to be seeing. You're going to see this kind of story, this common kind of characteristic in patients over and over and over again. And it's really good to kind of know how to approach it and things you can do to help them. So with Joe, she said she went into his home, and she was at the point in her field work where she was taking on these patients, and she was evaluating and treating them pretty much on her own. The CEI was there, but she was doing it on her own, and patient was really her responsibility to see what she could do to help this man. So she goes in, she said, she'll never forget it. He's sitting there in front of his computer at his little desk, and she said the computer screen it's like a computer TV screen, and it was just like huge, like half the wall. And there was this apartment, which was very, very small. She said it was just totally trashed. Clothes, garbage, everything everywhere. He had like a stack of pizza boxes, takeout pizza boxes that was next to him. And he was gaming on the computer, loved gaming, that sort of thing. Huge man, medically obese, over 400 pounds, all these different medical issues. His skin was breaking down, he had skin sores, heart disease, depression, history of sexual abuse. Kind of that trauma early on in his life, we'll talk more about that next week. Diabetes. And he was getting to the point where he couldn't do anything anymore by himself. He needed help bathing, dressing, toileting, preparing meals. In a lot of cases, he just wasn't doing those things. He was just doing takeout pizzas, getting around. He was falling, using a walker and a wheelchair. All these issues, things he liked to do, some meaningful occupations that he had within his little narrow scope of a world at that point. Socializing, he actually loved people, talking to people, and gaming. He loved to get on and do electronic gaming with his online friends. Basically, this man was kind of eating himself to death. He didn't really seem to have control, or didn't seem like he cared. So one of the first things the student wanted to know is, does this guy want therapy? Does he think he has a problem? Does he think he wants help? Does he feel like he can change? Does he feel like he wants help? So she asked him this, and he pretty much said, I realize this is an awful situation. I realize my health is awful, and I'm kind of just falling apart here. And I would like to change. I would like to become healthier. That's what he told her at this point when she first sees him on his initial vow. So we'll go back to Joe, keep referring back to him as we go through it, and you can see how this applies and what she did and the results she got and what the other student did and got for results. Okay, so as we look at positive change, trying to help our patients and ourselves change for the better, there's really three parts to it we need to look at. This readiness for change, these readiness for change levels. This is Prochaska's levels of change. And the willpower. Willpower is huge. How it can be strengthened, these different strategies around strengthening your willpower. And then the power of habit. That's kind of the biggest one. Using habits, using rewards and routines to kind of manipulate what you're already doing, these things you kind of don't realize you're doing, to get positive change. Okay, so let's just look at these levels of change first. This is the first thing you need to do, and this is kind of what that student did with Joe, is where is this person at in terms of how ready are they to change? How prepared are they to change? How willing are they, to kind of do what they need to do to change their life? Individuals at different levels have different needs. You kind of need to gear your interventions, what you're going to be doing, depending on what level they're at. That's why it's really important. First thing first, I want to know where you're at, in terms of your level of change. When it's really big, significant change, what do I mean by significant change? Usually around chemical dependency, smoking, drinking, drug use, even long-term diet issues. It can take a while. It's almost like a process. It's not something that's going to happen within like a 4-week, long-term, short-term goal. It can take almost a lifetime, really, in some cases. And people can kind of cycle through these levels of change, kind of like the wave circling around, until they get where they need to get. So it can be a big undertaking or a shorter undertaking. It just depends on where the person is coming from. These are the Prochaska's stages of change. These, you can count on it, there'll be questions around these on the midterm exam. It's the pre-contemplation stage, contemplation, preparation, action. And then once they get going, they're just kind of maintaining it. And then hopefully, maybe they may have a relapse and kind of start all over again. You're getting relapses around this big change. We talked about like chemical dependency. Commonly, you get relapses. And ideally, you start to spiral around, but eventually you're kind of circling upward, and you get to the point where you can get that lasting, long-term change around big change. Okay, so let's kind of break down each one of these different stages of change. Kind of see what they're about and that sort of stuff. Kind of understand them. Pre-contemplation. The person is not ready to make change and has no plans to change. If they're at this stage, you're kind of wasting your time as a therapist. You really can't do much with this person. They're kind of minimizing, rationalizing problems. Advice, lecturing, moralizing really doesn't work. You can kind of motivate them, maybe, if anything, to kind of learn more about what's going on with them, increasing their awareness. Again, you have to kind of leave it up to them. How has your health been? You're drinking a lot. It looks like you're consuming a lot of alcohol. Is it affecting your relationships in your life, your work, that sort of thing? that's kind of about as far as it goes with that. You're not really ready to make a plan or really going to go too far forward with it. Kind of like this cat here. He's got an obvious drinking problem, but you can see by the look on his face, he's pre-contemplation. Just don't mess with me. Don't ask me about my beer. I love my beer. I'm not going to give it up. I'm not going to change. And then the next stage is they're contemplating. They're thinking about it. They realize they have a problem, and they're kind of thinking about, you may need to at least cut down on the amount of beer I drink or the alcohol or whatever it is. Kind of a dawning awareness, considering it, ambivalence, anticipation, and then kind of some doubt. This is where we can kind of come in and help. Kind of facilitating that awareness we talked about, getting to some self-monitoring tools, help them visualize positive change. It can happen. Discuss with them how that problem is impacting their lives, previous efforts, what happened when they tried to give up smoking or lose weight before, identifying barriers. What is it that's really slowing you down? What did you run into before? Those habits that we'll get into and the strategies. You can kind of start talking about it, kind of breaking the whole situation down a little bit. And they kind of move from that. They're contemplating it, they're aware of it, and then they're kind of, okay, I'm aware this is a problem. You convinced me I need to do something about it. I'm ready to do it. I'm ready to prepare a plan to do it. I'm ready to prepare to kind of tackle this. So what do you do as an OT? Again, you have a big role with this. You're seeing a lot of clients in this kind of stage. You outline small steps, set time limits, consider existing habits, routines, rewards, consider contracts, like a behavioral contract. You can do this for so many weeks and that sort of thing. If then consequences, we'll talk about that. That's kind of behavioral, some like Skinner kind of stuff. Support systems are huge. Support groups, coping information, reminders, all these different little things you could help them with as they prepare a plan to change. And then they've got the plan, you've worked with them, and they put it into action. They're doing it. They're trying to change their life in some way. As they go along, you kind of focus on those benefits, those small rewards as they go along. The goals, or big on goals as OTs. Restructuring their environment and relationships to remove temptation. What I mean by that, if it's an eating issue, get all the junk food out of the house. If it's a drinking issue, all the alcohol out of the house. This also kind of ties into a positive support system. Think about Alcoholics Anonymous. Great example of a great support system. Everybody's kind of been through it together before. They're kind of going through it together, helping each other out. Empathy. Empathy is always a good thing, and it's a really important thing at this point as a therapist to help them with that. Planning for setbacks. Making contingency plans if things go awry, which go out of sync, out of whack. I mean, life happens, things happen. Probably a lot of you have tried or started diets or exercise programs, and when something happens, you get sick, you can't work out anymore, you get too busy, whatever it may be, and you kind of lose that momentum. Kind of planning for that ahead of time can be a good thing to kind of work your way through those problems because they're going to come up, those roadblocks. And that's kind of what maintenance is about as well. You've come up with a plan, you're prepared, you've taken action, and now you're just cruising along. You're doing well, you're on that diet, you've stopped drinking. Keep encouraging the client, keep talking about different strategies if they start to get bored with one strategy, limiting comparison with others, limited negative self-talk. A lot of people, especially if they're getting to abusive behaviors, they're always kind of beating themselves up mentally inside their head, kind of talking about that, thinking positive, again, planning for relapse, road bumps. You may, at this point, do some relapsing, especially if it's a big change you're undertaking. Relapse is okay. Growth isn't necessarily in a straight line. It can be very circular. Keep going around in those different stages until you kind of move through them. Big change, like I said, can take a long time. So let's kind of look at these as a whole. And then we'll apply it back to Joe and kind of see where he is at, we think where he's at. Pre-contemplation, not ready to change. Contemplating, kind of thinking about it, can take about 6 months to the point where they get ready. Okay, I've decided I'm going to prepare a plan. They're going to take action within 30 days. Take those action steps. And then they take action. And usually that first 6 months can be a real key, fragile time for that action. And then they've gone beyond 6 months and they're trying to maintain. They've really got a lot of momentum going. just kind of keeping things going in the right direction. So we think about Joe. He said he was, one, aware that he had a health problem, and two, that he wanted to change that health problem. So he's definitely not in the pre-contemplation stage. He's beyond that. Contemplation. Is he contemplating? What do you think? To me, this is where he's at. He's thinking about it. He's realizing it's a problem, but he's not really ready to take action yet. This is where the OT could come in and maybe help him get through to the prep stage and then the action stage. That was kind of what the student was kind of trying to do with Joe around different things, around diet, exercise, getting him moving more, getting so he could be independent with his different ADL tasks and that sort of thing. Assessing your patient's readiness to change. These questions down here, these simple 5 questions can help you get at pretty quickly, and you get to the point you may already be there. It's not rocket science, where you think you can figure out, where you think somebody is at. As simple as it may seem, you need to do it and kind of devise your plan on where you think the person is at. So this is kind of like some questions that may help. Are you ready to change? Have you asked Joe these questions? No, and I do not intend to change in the next 6 months. Then we say he's pre-contemplation, we're kind of wasting our time. But Joe said yes. I want to change. I think I could change in the next 6 months. Are you ready to change in the next 6 months? I do not intend. Sorry, the first one is I do not intend to change in the next 6 months. They're not thinking about changing at all. The second one, which is more Joe, yes, I want to change, but I'm not sure I can do it in the next 6 months. It almost sounds like from descriptions of him, he would say, yes, I could do it in the next 6 months. I think that's possible. So you would check that off. And then you go on to the next one. No, but I intend to. I'm not ready to change right now, but I intend to in the next 30 days. He may be here. You may like her next session with him, putting together a plan. He may say, yeah, I can do that in the next 30 days. He may be preparation stage, putting together that plan. Yes, I'm ready to change. They have been for the last 6 months. He's definitely not there. They're doing it. They've done it for 6 months. The actions change. And then you're doing it for more than 6 months. That's the maintenance state change level. Here's an example around smoking, a common thing this really applies to. Are you interested in trying to quit smoking? No, pre-contemplation. Are you thinking about quitting smoking? Yes, contemplation. Are you ready to plan how you will quit smoking? And then if you're not, you're back to contemplation. If it says, yes, I'm ready to make a plan, your preparation. Are you in the process of trying to quit smoking? I've quit smoking and I've been doing it less than 6 months. Your action, you made that decision. Are you trying to stay smoke-free 6 months or longer, that sort of level. So we're kind of thinking that he is contemplation. Joe is contemplation. He's contemplating it. The OT could help him. And she tried to help him. And she went in and she put together a plan with Joe that Joe agreed with, and he thought it'd be a good plan to get him moving, doing stuff, moving throughout the day. She gave him adaptive devices to help him dress his lower body, sponge bathing. She gave him devices to help with the toileting, the toilet hygiene. She did some adaptive equipment in his home around grab bars, that sort of thing. Rearranged things in the kitchen so it was easy for him to do that. Came up with a diet menu, some good foods that they kind of worked on together, that he could prepare simple things so he wasn't just ordering the pizza out all the time. All these great positive ideas that she tried with Joe, and which he initially was quite motivated and excited to do, and they kind of did this together for a few weeks. So we'll kind of talk about what happens to him and then what happened in the other situation he ended up being in a minute here. Let's kind of move on to the idea of facilitating change. So she came up with all these great ideas, started working with Joe, and we have to kind of think about, okay, how could she facilitate these big kind of changes that we're thinking and trying to get Joe to move towards better health? First big part of any kind of change, obviously, with all of us is willpower. How much motivation and willpower do you have to change? You say willpower, a big part of willpower is delayed gratification. great example of delayed gratification, kind of where you guys are as students, is somebody that goes to college, especially like a 5-year program that you're doing or a 4-year program. You have to wait. You have to really kind of keep your nose to the grindstone and work at it for 4 or 5 years before you get that degree. You need that delayed gratification. So there was this really cool, famous test that was done around delayed gratification with children. They were 4-year-olds, and they were told, if you watch this video, it's quite hilarious. It kind of simulates the test that was done. So they gave these kids a marshmallow and said, you can either eat this now or wait till I come back in a minute or two, and I'll give you another one, so you'll have 2. So you can eat now and just have 1, or wait a minute or 2, and you'll get 2 marshmallows. And they told us to a 4-year-old. Can you imagine a 4-year-old is this just kind of spitting when you give them the marshmallow, and it's like right in front of them, and I told if they wait, they're going to get more. Only about 30% of the children resisted the urge. The rest just chowed that marshmallow down the second they got it. Well, the interesting part is they followed these kids throughout their whole lives. And they found that when they became adults, there was a distinct difference between the kiddos that waited and the children that did not wait. The children that waited, that had that stronger delayed gratification, which, as you said, is pretty much everybody in this room, did better on their SAT scores, had more education, more popular with friends, did fewer drugs, higher frontal lobe activity in the brain, which is where you have your control, your impulse control. A comparatively reduced rate of unhealthy weight. They were overweight, better at reaching personal goals, talk about relationships. And this played out over all these different cohorts. Kids that are poor or rich, different ethnic diversity, children of color, not of color. It didn't matter. This pattern seemed to hold through for the majority of kids. It was quite something. Talking about the power of willpower, and how a lot of it is kind of genetic and preborn, but it's not all genetic. That's kind of the good news. There were outliers that went against the trend. In other words, they ate that marshmallow right off the bat, but they still went to college and did all these things that took a lot of delayed gratification. So what are the factors, some of these factors behind willpower? It's kind of the nature versus nurture thing. Definitely a lot of it's genetics that do influence temperament and behavior. There's this particular gene they've even tied it down to. But also the environment plays a big role. The environment even influences your DNA and your personality. For example, there's been a strong connection that's been found between childhood stress and willpower. If you had childhood trauma, it's going to affect potentially your willpower. I.e., if you experience severe stress or trauma as a child, you're more likely to be impulsive. Who fits that? Who rings your bell? You think, oh, maybe that was what was going on with that guy. Joe, he was sexually abused as a child. Does that have something to do with all the problems he had as an adult? According to these studies, it really may have. But what about the outliers? The ones that kind of beat the odds, beat the terrible environment, beat the lack of impulsivity as children, and still did really well. What was kind of going on with them? Kind of some things to think about, which just gives us real hope as therapists that we can make a big difference potentially in all of our children's lives. If you're into pediatrics, if you get them young enough, there is a lot of hope they can overcome a lot of barriers these hardships that they're given at no fault of their own. A lot of it comes down to this idea of neuroplasticity. Remember neuroplasticity from 300? The idea that the brain can change itself. It's capable of changing. The frontal lobe activity that's so important with controlling impulse control and delayed gratification can improve as a result of training. So I'm sure this is something Chris will talk to you about in different ways, but there's ways of working on that frontal lobe to improve these kinds of things. So we can overcome genetics through education, parenting. There is hope for a lot of this stuff. It isn't like a predestined thing. Different strategies that work around delayed gratification and willpower. Distraction is the obvious one that comes to mind. A lot of those kiddos, if you watch the video, they were doing distraction. as they were in their real study. They were singing, playing, thinking of the marshmallow as a stinky fish, covering the marshmallow up, emotional distancing themselves from the marshmallow, anything they can think of to not think about the marshmallow so they could wait to get that second one. Sesame Street, which is very much into this power of delayed gratification in terms of future consequences to childhood development. They do a lot with this around the Cookie Monster, avoiding eating the cookies, the impulse to eat the cookies, that sort of thing. Kind of overcoming your immediate emotions. Okay, so this little picture here, this cookie is actually having a nightmare. The Cookie Monster is coming to eat him and he's kind of freaking out. So that's kind of what's going on in that. All right, so that's moving right along here. The power of if-then binding. What is if-then binding? This is one of your tools. We're getting into the tools. We got distraction. Now we're going to do if-then binding, which is basically just behavioral stuff. Consequences. If I give in, I'm going to have to pay the price. What you're trying to do is get over the particular hot emotional response, the trigger to temptation. That chocolate cake in front of me looks amazing. I'm salivating. I want to eat it. To counter it with X, the consequences of your actions. If I eat that cake, it's going to mess up my blood sugars, wipe out my diet. I've got to resist. So it's the immediate versus the long term, this war that goes on inside your brain. For this kind of if-then thing to work, you need to make the cost greater than the benefit. Every time I smoke a cigarette, for example, I will donate $100 to a cause I hate. You're going to improve this cause that you hate and go broke pretty quickly if you start binging on cigarettes, if you hold yourself to this contract. But it has to be enough cost and it has to be clear so there's no wiggle room, because people will, when it comes to addictions, people will wiggle it any way they can. So you have to make it the right kind of if-then binding contract. And some therapists do use contracts like this with patients that they agree on and things like this. Here's one that wasn't so great. It kind of shows you how it needs to be more clear and kind of leads to one of these other strategies that actually happened by accident. So this is a psychologist, a true story. He made this New Year's vow not to buy any more cigarettes. It's like he told himself, why am I buying these things that are killing me? Gotta stop smoking, gotta stop buying the cigarettes. But it wasn't really binding, and there really wasn't a significant cost involved. And what he ended up doing is borrowing cigarettes off of friends. And then he kind of sees the butts in the street, and he's getting that, that nicotine craving, which is quite huge. And he starts getting the butts. And then one day he sees a butt. At the same time, this homeless individual sees the butt, and they both want that butt of cigarette, and they end up fighting over it. Wrestling in the street over a cigarette butt. And afterwards, he's like, oh my God, what have I turned into? I'm like this nicotine-crazed monster. So he realizes at this point, he has this dawning awareness, this drug, this nicotine drug, has overtaken my whole being. I need to stop. And that's when he stops. So it kind of leads to our next strategy, this kind of idea of awareness. Distraction, if-then binding, the behavioral Skinner kind of thing, and then awareness. He became aware of how addicted he really was. And it worked for him. He had a real full awareness. In the case of somebody like Joe, he seems to be aware, at least he says he's aware, but it's not really working. He's still not changing his behavior. For change to be successful, you need to want it, that willpower thing. This can be facilitated through increased awareness. This is something you can facilitate as a therapist to kind of show them the impact that their behaviors are having on their life. Again, thinking long-term over short-term, because the brain wants to go the other way around. It always wants to think the short-term. You need to cool the heat of the moment and heat up the long-term consequences. The psychologist did not change until his awareness of addiction reached a certain threshold when he saw himself fighting for a cigarette butt in the street. Awareness can be a powerful tool for change. Huge National Institute of Health study found food journaling to be the most effective long-term tool for maintaining weight loss. Participants became more aware of their eating habits. I think Weight Watchers does this, or they used to do this. You're just writing down, what you eat each day. It just increases your awareness. You become more conscious of it. Similar ideas. Putting all your in-between meals in between meals, food in a see-through bag. My wife, who's a dietitian, used to do this with some of her clients. She had the see-through bag and everything we eat in between meals, all those chips and candy bars and all that. She think, oh, this isn't my meal. I'm having a good low-diet meal. These are just some snacks to get me through my day. Put it in a see-through bag. You see it. It's like, oh my God, look at all these calories. A big one is the drinks that everybody loves. Those big drinks, the calories in those drinks. It's like you're drinking down half a dozen, 2 or 3 hot dogs. It's so many calories in those things. If you really look up the calories, if you put those in a plastic bag and you look at the end of the day and you add up all the calories, it's like, oh my God, this is why I can't lose weight. It's the stuff in between meals. I need to stop this. Another example, personal example I did that worked for me when I was an undergraduate, or like the age of most of you in this room. I really struggled academically, wasn't a very good student, and I wanted to change. I was getting increased awareness. I need to get better grades, that sort of thing, get my life in order. So I said, okay, what I'm going to do is really just be completely honest with myself in terms of I'm writing down how much time I studied each night. I thought I studied a lot, or that I was consistent in my studying, and I really wasn't. So each night I just wrote down 0 or 30 minutes or whatever it was, and then I could go back and see, oh my God, I'm not really studying much consistently at all. And I said, I'm going to study consistently, and I started writing that down, and it just flipped things around. Again, the idea is increasing awareness can be a powerful facilitator of change. Going back to Joe again, a hard case with him, all that stuff going on with him, the awareness didn't seem to be dawning, didn't seem to be making a difference. I think a lot of it goes back to the psychological issues, self-worth, not much self-worth that he probably had of himself, and you see that with a lot of our clients. So those didn't work so much for him, but we have more strategies we're going to get into. This is probably the most powerful one, and this is the one they tried to use with Joe. Routines, kind of rewards, kind of connect with routines. Let's kind of talk about routines and habits. We all have these routines and habits, and they really just drive our life. Most of it happens kind of at an unconscious level. You're kind of doing it without even realizing you're doing it. A great example of this is, it goes back to the basal ganglia of your brain, and it's like automatic pilot. You're not consciously aware of what you're doing. A good example of this, I can think, personal example, when my son was going to high school, once in a while, not a lot, but once in a while I would drive him to high school. Here's a picture of me, kind of like the shirt. And he would go to John Baptist High School, which kind of looks like this picture right back there. So I would drive him to John Baptist High School. But it was different, obviously, taking him to the high school than it was me driving to Hassan to work. At one point in the drive, I had to make a turn and go to the Baptist versus Hassan. But usually when I make this drive to Hassan, I'm on automatic pilot. I'm instantly thinking about my day, teaching, whatever it is. I'm not really thinking about teaching. It's this basal ganglia automatic pilot stuff. So I come to this place where I need to turn, I can't tell how many times, and I would just turn to go to work. And I would just forget about that. And my son would say, Dad, you made the wrong turn again. You got to take me to work today. So, I'd have to stop and go back and be embarrassed and all that. But the point is, unconscious, routine habit, they drive our lives. We all kind of do that. How long does it take to become automatic? How long did it take before your drive to work, your drive to school, you started doing that automatic pilot? Probably not too long. Most habits kind of become quite ingrained after about 21 to 30 days. That's kind of like the magic kind of marker thing. If you want to do a new exercise program, new diet, new whatever, if you can do it for 30 days, it starts to become automatic. You don't have to constantly think about doing it. Like brushing your teeth becomes automatic, that sort of thing. Again, these routines, these habits. And once they get ingrained, if you hit that 30-day mark with me driving to Hassan, like I kept making the wrong turn, they get hard to change. You're just doing it without realizing you're doing it. And it kind of unfolds automatically unless you kind of fight it. Another thing that really drives these habits, these bad habits, are these triggers, these trigger-driven loops. Become unconscious of them. A neurological, physiological craving or emotion reward usually drives the cue in the habit. Here's an example of these 3-step loops. So you have your routine, your reward, cue, they kind of work, or maybe not in that way, but they're kind of always kind of working. Smoking every night after supper. So the routine is you have supper every night. The cue is your stomach gets filled. You get that shaded, whatever you call it, feeling. Your stomach is full. You feel full, releases all these chemicals, and then boom, that triggers that craving for the nicotine and the smoking. So it's habit, cue, reward. The routine. Routine, cue, reward, or routine, reward, cue, it kind of go loops together. In that case, it's the habit of eating supper every night, the cue of your stomach feeling full, and then the reward kind of the cigarettes. Drinking alcohol with friends. The cue is you go out to eat, you go to the bar, down to Mason's maybe, in Brewer or something, you're out with friends. What do? You drink. It's what you do when you go out. Snacking every afternoon when you're studying. You have that routine of studying every afternoon, like 1 to 4, because of my schedule this week. I study in the library or whatever, or at home. And as I study, I get distracted, I need to focus. I need those chips. It keeps me focused. It kind of connects, it binds together. Talked about the high-calorie drinks. You get up in the morning, you're dead to the world, you got to get your brain going to listen to wellness and all these amazing classes. So you get this huge honkin' drink from Dunkin' Donuts. That's the reward. It gets stimulating and all that, and the fat craving and all kind of connects. The emotional and the physical all kind of connects, binds it together. Other examples of these cues kind of drive your life. You're coming home, you work late, or you have a family or something that you have to cook for, and what do you see? This big yellow M, and you go, oh my God, McDonald's. And before you even realize it, you're salivating, and your stomach is going, oh my God, I could use some French fries, a milkshake, quarter pound with cheese, the whole 9 yards, and you give into it. And then it starts to become this habit, this routine. Every Friday night, you're too tired to cook, I'll just drive by McDonald's to get some food. Hard work and stress, and the reward of alcohol, comfort food. Another example, a lot of us do this. This is our reward. I come home, I'm going to have a drink. I go home, I'm going to eat some high carbs food. So again, going back to change. We don't want to change these habits and routines, these cues really, but we do want to change the reward. So here's some examples how you can kind of flip things around and kind of manipulate what your body's already doing. So before, maybe you exercised and studied and then did something detrimental to your health. I talked last week, I think, in this class about the student that wanted to give up smoking, and he would exercise and smoke, hike a mountain and smoke a cigarette. And I think he got the endorphin high, connected to the endorphin high, the exercise. A lot of times we exercise, we love that endorphin high that we get after we exercise, the sweating, the feeling, that feel-good kind of emotion, and then it would cue him to crave the nicotine and to smoke. So flip it around. Still exercise, still get the great endorphin high, but change it. Maybe do Netflix binging. Even a junk food would be better than cigarettes. Replacing the alcohol, drinking of alcohol with emotional release of confession. A lot of things that people get out of the alcohol. It numbs, it releases chemicals, makes you feel better. You may have stress in your life, and you kind of numb it with the alcohol. Get that. Still gonna have the stress, but instead of going out and drinking, going out and talk about the alcohol, connect with other people, going through similar events, get that emotional release. So the emotional release is replaced the alcoholic release, the alcohol, drug release. Meditation, Tai Chi yoga, and reduced emotional stress. It's another one of a good kind of reward system. There are also kind of keystone habits. One habit that changes many habits, they've kind of studied these habits, Prochaska especially, exercise seems to be a keystone habit. If you can get into that exercise routine of every day, it seems to cascade and lead to all these other good habits. You start to take better care of your body, you eat better, you make smarter decisions around whatever it is, alcohol consumption, that sort of thing. It all seems to start with exercise. Making your bed, believe it or not, is another one. If you make your bed in the morning, seems to lead this cascade of good habits and good routines. And then what happens, a lot of us, we run into unexpected barriers, kind of quote unquote life happens. You need to prepare for that. A good example, you get sick, you get stressed, change in jobs, more demands at jobs, at your job, more demand at school. Maybe what's throwing you off at Husson in this program is the first 2 years in the program wasn't too bad in terms of time, and I could manage to do all these things. And now it's like, oh, all this time it takes to study anatomy, all this time it does take. It throws your whole sense of these other things you wanted to do off and routines. Example with me is with this job, the nature of this job. In the summer, things slow down. I'm still working, but I'm not teaching. I don't have to be in the office. I have more free time. I can manipulate my time better. Usually I start an exercise program or start a new habit in the summer. And then I go back to school in the fall, and it's like 24/7 teaching, grading, all that. And those habits, those changes I did over the summer are right out the window. I just lose it all. So you have to prepare for these things that are going to come up. Life happens. You have to help your patients prepare for these changes that are going to happen. Come up with a plan ahead of time. So what I'm starting to do now, a personal example, is I scale down my exercise program or whatever it is I want to change from the summer. So it's not really as ambitious, not really as time consuming, but I'm still doing it on kind of a micro kind of level. And I go back to the more involved level when I have more time. Here's a good study that kind of showed that. I think there's an example of that. Total knee replacements. I'm not familiar with those. Some people have arthritic knees, gets to the point where they have to replace the knee. And it's a wonderful kind of surgery they do. It's very, very successful. They get a lot more use, pain-free use out of their knee. But one of the more difficult parts of this whole process of total knee replacement is the rehab afterwards. It's very, very painful rehab, but it's necessary pain. You have to kind of work through that pain to get your knee back to the motion you used to have, to get that motion back in your knee. So you're going to have to deal with pain. And some days the pain is going to be unbearable, some days it's going to be more manageable. So you can't let the pain throw you off in terms of moving and exercise. It's a big challenge for the therapist and the patient to keep moving, keep working that knee, to work through the pain so they can get that motion back so it doesn't get contracted, which means it gets kind of stuck permanently and you have all this kind of issues around your knee. So in this particular study, they asked these patients to write in interruption plans. How are you going to deal with it when you get pain, too much pain in your knee? How are you going to deal with it when you can't, the PT is not there to come in and cue you to do these sorts of things, or you're sick or something? What's your interruption plan? And what are your goals for rehab? What's your reward? Kind of thing. The routine to the reward. The exercise is the routine. The reward is getting back to skiing again or swimming again or whatever it is. And they found quite clearly that patients with personal written plans got better at twice the rate compared to those without a written plan. They were ready for the bumps that were going to inevitably come up. So these patient goals were focused on two things: how they would deal with a specific moment of unanticipated pain, going to do less, but can still do something. Personal rewards for enduring the pain of the prescribed rehab exercises. Reward was being able to do more, maybe watching a show on TV or eating some junk food, whatever it was. They had a reward system in place, and they had a plan to deal with the problems that would come up. Okay, so let's take a break. I'm sorry, let's keep going here. Nope, I'm going to stop and then I'll continue this in a minute.